If you could all just gather around and take your seats, we're going to start the third panel for today's symposium. The third panel is Accelerating Transportation Electrification, the Road Ahead. And our moderator is Thomas Ashley, who's a JD MSEL 2008. He's currently the Vice President of Government Affairs and Utility Relations at Volterra. Prior to joining Volterra, Tom developed and led the policy and market development practice at Shell Recharge Solutions, formerly Greenlots, and was a previous speaker at a Vermont Law School symposium in the past. So welcome back, thank you. And really interested to hear about what's been happening with you since then, and also about the road ahead for EV electrification. So thank you.
Oh, my pleasure, Dan. Hi, everyone. If this mic is working, I'm going to sit here with the panel. So I'd like to just share a little bit about the work that I've been doing and I'm doing now, and then get right into the panel. So just quick, because my assumption is most in the room are unfamiliar with my current company, Volterra. I just want to make a quick note about what we're doing, because I think it's a pretty good illustration of some of the challenges that we're going to need to navigate going forward to really scale up transportation electrification. So the short story, my new company, I just joined 6 months ago, Volterra. We're a real estate and charging company. And so our business model is that we buy real estate and then we develop it for EV charging. We're leveraging private equity that is coming from EQT, who's our single owner currently. And there are two tracks of this business. One is customer directed, where we have a fleet telling us where they need charging. And then we go and deliver that. The other scenario is where we're working ahead of a fleet or multiple fleets, and we're proactively buying the real estate and developing charging to be ready when those fleets are ready for the need for charging. And so what I would say at this stage, there's been a lot, and we may talk a little bit about funding for infrastructure during the course of the discussion today. But because of where the capital is coming from for my company, infrastructure funding is not a challenge. We have the pathway to do that. The challenges that we're confronting, and I would say a fair amount of the rest of the industry are confronting some version of these, is actually around local land use and zoning. I'll just say that most cities don't have in their zoning code EV charging as a primary use. And then what is really a crunch point, and Eric can probably share a little bit more perspective, is working with the electric utility industry to energize projects. And there are some unique challenges that I think Volterra is seeing in that we are entering the market afresh. So Volterra just got its official launch last August, so a little over a year old. And unlike a typical fleet customer that a utility already knows potentially where they are, how many trucks, cars, et cetera, they may have, maybe there's been at least some initial conversation around potential electrification plans, we might buy property anywhere within a utility service area. And the first time the utility knows about the need that we or the fleets that we're serving has is when we first engage them. And so we're working with the utility community to try to transition what, Eric, I would describe as an 18 to 24 plus month average period for energization of projects beyond a couple megawatts to 12 months. TBD on how successful that is, but that's what I, through Volterra, am seeing as the need for fleets who, frankly, are going slower than they need to go and then they're going to be trying to go faster than necessarily the conditions exist to support that. So with that as a little bit of an intro and a little bit of context of some of what I'm working on currently, we're going to go ahead and hear from the panel. We'll just go Evan on down. So just some quick self-intros, what you're doing or working on in terms of electrification, what you might want to highlight that your organizations are doing or working on for electrification, and we can go from there.
That's great. Thanks, Tom. I'm Evan Belser. I was at JD in 2010. Been in DC ever since, and I've been at Ford Motor Company for almost 2 years. Before that, I had 11 years. Thank you. 11 years at US EPA, where I ran the Vehicle and Engine Enforcement Program under the Clean Air Act. And Ford is doing a lot on electrification. We are very quickly expanding our ability to make electric vehicles. We are introducing a lot of new customers to Ford, introducing a lot of new customers to electrification. We are investing $50 billion into our global electrification efforts through 2026. And so I'll share some more facts of the highlights, but right now we are out in the market with the electrified versions of our iconic brands. We didn't start on the edges. We went right at Mustang with the Mach-E, went right at the F-150, the greatest selling vehicle for 46 straight years in the United States. We electrified that. And the transit van, the E-Transit is a commercial van that is also electrified and is proving that it's huge value for commercial customers. And so that's just in the US market, and that's going to be the focus today. I look forward to the conversation. Eric?
Thanks, Evan. Eric Carlin. I manage PG&E's clean transportation policy, strategy, and advocacy. I'm relatively new to the utility space. I joined the utility in May, coming from the EV industry side of things. So that's been a bit of an education. I've been in the space, though, for since 2017 in the EV charging space. And that followed completing the Merle program at VLS. So yeah, by way of a little bit of a background on PG&E that you might not be aware of, we're the single largest utility in the country by most definitions and metrics. We have about 1 in 6 of the nation's EVs on the road today are in our service territory. That's over 500,000 EVs. We have a goal to get to about 3 million by 2030. And we've gotten to where we are by a combination of deliberate state policy, state investment, combined with over a decade now of utility planning programs and also investment to move the market. So that's something that we're proud of. We have a clean transportation team, a broader clean transportation team of over 50 individuals. Yes, that's 50 folks working on everything from our existing portfolio of programs, our past portfolio of programs, doing everything from customer onboarding to program management, program design, standing up our different VGI programs and implementing them, so on and so forth. But as Tom alluded to, we're also looking down the gauntlet of some new challenges and some new issues that we're working at. And indeed, front and center is grid capacity and grid availability. So we've invested over $1 billion in the last 8 years on exactly that. But the scale is going to have to increase significantly in the next few years. We have a $15 billion plan to invest in grid capacity and related grid hardening. But this implicates challenges that the utility sector has never seen before in terms of scale, scope, funding, regulatory, affordability challenges. But at the same time, that's a lot of new load that represents flexible load that has the power to not just, of course, clean up the transportation sector's emissions, but also over time put downward pressure on rates and be a net benefit for the whole system and every utility customer, whether you drive an EV or not. So yeah, excited to be here today and talk about more of these and related topics. And yeah. Mm-hmm.
Sebastian?
Sebastian Castellanos here. Thank you for having us. I work for the World Resources Institute. We're a global nonprofit organization, a research organization primarily. We work mostly with governments or local entities around the world. We have offices in DC, Mexico, Brazil, India, China, Ethiopia, missing a couple, but all over the world basically. My work has been mostly working on electric mobility around the world, but I've been focusing for the past few years in the US sector specifically. Right now, I'm a senior manager with our electric school bus initiative. So I work with electric school buses and with school districts around the country, supporting them in their electrification efforts. We're really interested in making sure that the transition to electric mobility happens in an equitable manner. So we're really trying to work with those school districts in particular that have been relegated in the past. Tribes, for example, we just had a meeting with tribes this morning, and really trying to get the money that's coming out of the federal government right now into the hands of the people that have been relegated and are really facing the biggest challenges right now when it comes to air pollution, when it comes to health burden. So that's pretty much our role right now. I do have broad expertise in the transportation sector. We can maybe talk a bit about later about some of the smaller vehicles. EVs are not just cars or buses. We're talking about a bunch of other things that are happening in the space. So yeah, thank you for having us.
All right. Well, thanks, gentlemen. So let's get into some questions. So I've got some questions for the whole panel, some questions targeted for individual panelists. In the audience, both in person, online, please be thinking about questions you might like to ask. We'll have plenty of time and really welcome some interaction after we set the stage a little bit more here. Gentlemen, we're now a year out, a little more, from passage of the Inflation Reduction Act, 2 years-ish out from passage of the bipartisan infrastructure law. How are things looking for your organizations, and what might not have happened that you were looking for in those two really landmark legislative packages as regards the transportation segment? Evan, maybe start with you.
Yeah, I think both those pieces of legislation and the CHIPS Act, which is a little on the side, are really meaningful for the auto industry as a whole, definitely meaningful for Ford Motor Company. I think top of the list of, would be the production tax credit for making batteries in the United States. Okay, so this is a credit that allows anyone who is making certain battery components to claim, and that credit's refundable, and it's in direct proportion, the amount to how much of the battery component you make. And so it can add up to thousands of dollars for each of the electric vehicles, for making the battery components for that electric vehicle. That's really meaningful, and it helps us get off the starting line. And to be sure, China left the starting line about 15 years ago on industrial policy for electric vehicles, and they're way out ahead. And so I think at a whole, I think what those laws are doing is they are getting us going. We've got a lot of strengths as a country and as an industry and as a company. But we're facing a future where we have significant competition, and the industry is going electric, not because of regulatory reasons only, but because it's a better product. And right now, China's running the table. And so we're seeing the beginnings of industrial policy. I think we're seeing lack of bipartisan support, and that's one of the main priorities that we have at Ford, is to try to make sure that we break those down and get common interests so that we can move together collectively so we can compete on the global stage.
Yeah, I'd agree with all that and the benefits that those tax incentives and related policies have done for onshoring manufacturing, some other pieces in there. The NEVI program gets a lot of attention, as it should, in terms of creating a national harmonized network of public charging, initially along corridors, but then more broadly for indeed addressing some of those infrastructure barriers to EV adoption. I'd also say that some of the various discretionary grant programs targeting different parts of and different barriers and market challenges that exist are also been very powerful. There's ones that the utility sector are focused on additionally for grid hardening and for other investments. Buckets of funding that can be used for non-traditional funding for utilities, such that not all costs need to be put into rates to address affordability and related challenges. I'd also say that California has for quite some time, done a lot of work and effort in regulating vehicle standards and cleaning up the vehicle fleet. But related to these efforts, we're now seeing EPA do the same thing and kind of parlay what California has done, but have it be realized on a national level. So we're watching that in particular with the medium and heavy duty fleet. So just a few additional pieces that I think have been important following those two landmark pieces of legislation. Yeah.
Sebastian, how about from your perspective?
Transformative, of course, I think that is like the word, but it's just a starting point. If you talk about the school bus industry, there's 500,000 school buses in the country right now. 5 billion, it's a ton of money, but it also nothing when you think about electrifying 500,000 vehicles. So yeah, it's a very good starting point, but I think the challenge right now is really getting to scale. This is going to get us to the starting line, but how do we really get to scale? I think also a few shortcomings. Again, I mentioned this at the start, but when we talk about EVs, I think people's minds go straight to cars, right? But there's so many other things. There's the E-Bike Act, for example, that didn't pass into legislation. That would have been amazing, and we're still fighting to get it through the line. Electric bikes are the #1 EV seller in the world right now. So some shortcomings, a good starting point, but yeah, I think the challenge right now is really, let's get this money out the door, but then let's make sure that the industry is prepared for what's coming next.
So I heard a little bit just now from you, Sebastian, maybe a little bit from you, Eric, but what didn't happen or didn't land through these legislative packages that either you or your organization maybe were looking for, or frankly may not have been part of the process, but would have been really impactful to take us forward?
Yeah, I'll start. I think there probably could have been a greater focus on medium and heavy duty. There's chunks of the funding that can be used for indeed that, but there wasn't as much of an overt focus there, and that perhaps was a bit of a miss, not just some infrastructure, but vehicles as well. I didn't mention earlier, no one else did either, but just the tax credits for getting folks into electric vehicles have been incredibly significant for moving the market and bringing it back to those manufacturers that had already got to their previous cap. So I think that's the single biggest miss, if you will, just a greater focus on medium and heavy duty.
Evan, how about for Ford or for you personally?
Yeah. Well, I can riff on what you were saying. Ford is not the company that makes most of the biggest Class 8 trucks on the road, which is incredibly important. And the conversation earlier about hydrogen was absolutely fascinating for me. But we are the biggest seller of commercial vehicles in the medium space. And so what we're learning is that the commercial vehicle tax credit, while the eligibility is quite open, the fact is most of the companies who buy those vehicles do not have a tax liability against which to monetize the credit. And so it's of no use at all. And so that's a big miss. And right now, the retail consumer credit, the regular people go buying a car credit, they, starting in January, can transfer that, and therefore they don't need an underlying tax liability. They can still get the benefit of that tax credit even if they don't owe taxes in the first place or owe enough. And they can get it up front, which is even better. And so there's nothing like that on the commercial vehicle side. And so at first it looks great because it's up to $40,000 for a heavy duty vehicle, but it's just not actually going to move the business model for fleets, at least the traditional established business model.
Okay, thanks. Maybe we can zoom out a little bit. Sebastian, let's talk global for a moment, and let's focus on the transportation sector. How far do EVs get us?
I think EVs are definitely important and are probably the most important thing that we can do right now. And we've ran the numbers, and a few folks have also ran the numbers, and they're not enough. I think that's the main message, right? I think we definitely need to be focusing on this, but we need to focus on many other things. We basically need to chew gum and walk at the same time because it's not going to be enough. So for the next, 7 or so years, 2030 is a really clear deadline that we have right now. We need to reduce emissions by it's an unsurmountable amount. Basically, if we just think about electric vehicles, it's not going to be possible. So we really need to think about some of the other policies that are going to get us there. We need to really focus, as I mentioned, electric vehicles, electric bikes, for example, are a very good measure that we need to start thinking about. But also, we need to start thinking about how to get people off cars, basically. I think that's one of the key things that needs to happen. Obviously, this is not going to happen everywhere. As countries start, developing more people have access to cars. So we need to really focus on those countries that are developing right now, so that they don't get hooked up on cars as the U.S. has, and a lot of the developed world has. So we need to start thinking about that from now. And again, if we don't do that right now, it's going to be too late. It's going to be impossible that the numbers we've run is that we need around 40% of the sales need to be electric vehicles by 2030, and the projections are not going to get us anywhere near. So again, there's just too many things to consider, but clear things are, let's avoid unnecessary trips, for example. So if you don't need to travel, then don't travel, and that's going to avoid a lot of emissions. Try to shift a lot of the trips that are happening right now on private vehicles, and let's shift them towards public transit. Let's shift them towards walking, towards cycling, and then of course there still lives a huge chunk of miles traveled that we need to get people in electric vehicles. So we just need to do everything all at once at the same time.
And Sebastian, if I may, with a little bit of a follow-up there. So what I just heard is, okay, we need to electrify everything, and that's not enough. Let's zoom back to the U.S. Is this a policy play? Is it a behavior play? How do we get there to not take the extra trip, to take transit, to ensure that transit's electrified when we take it? What is the path ahead to make this happen?
It's all of the above, basically. I think we need to do everything we can. Policy will play a huge role in this. I think, part of your previous question, what else was missing? I think support for transit. That was, there was part of support for transit, a lot of support for transit after, the pandemic. So that was good. But transit needs a lot more support. Like, not everyone can afford a new car. So we're just asking people to, get on a new car. Car ownership is really expensive. So, there's a number I have in my head is the lowest quintile of population by income, they spend a third of their income in transportation. So we can't have that. It's like a really very inequitable thing to do. Just expect everyone to be on a car, and to be on a new car, then I think it's just going to be impossible. So yeah, it's all of the above. I think people can make their own effort on their own, but it's going to be difficult. Some of the things we were mentioning, for example, is just really, land use is going to be a really important thing. If you think about transportation is basically just a Band-Aid, because, it's trying to get people to where they need. But if things were here, if everything I needed was here, I would need transportation. So transportation is just a Band-Aid. So if we get land use right, I think that's going to be a huge thing. There's a lot of, cities around the country doing good things on land use. Minneapolis, for example, making it possible to build 2- and 3-story buildings, which was not possible in a lot of the country right now. Like, I live in Silver Spring, Montgomery County. There's no way someone's going to build, multi-story, multifamily housing where I live. It's all single-family housing. Taking away parking minimums, for example, that's like an unscientific way of saying you have to build a minimum number of parking spots. That's really not the way to go. Let's build maximums. So yeah, there's a lot of things that need to be done. Of course, policy is going to be the main thing that needs to happen. But again, it's a bit overwhelming, to be honest. But we have to do it.
All right. Well, thank you. We didn't plan this, but Sebastian just checked the land use box for me, or land use zoning policy, amongst a rather concerning perspective otherwise. But thank you. Eric, so back to kind of the utility energization front. You gave us some numbers earlier about what your organization has invested to date, and maybe what it's seeking to invest. Whether for your organization specifically, or the sector generally in this country, how big a challenge is this to facilitate this transition of the transportation sector to electric or zero emissions, as it regards the grid and, frankly, keeping the lights on?
Yeah, I mean, it's a big challenge and a big opportunity. But just recent history, I mean, it wasn't that long ago that every utility in the country was planning for flat or declining load growth. Everyone, in this room probably heard of the utility death spiral that people were talking about in the context of distributed generation and grid defection and the kind of vicious cycle that could have existed there. That's been thrown out the window, kind of turned on its face, and in less than a decade has gone from that to looking at projections that are entirely the opposite, right? So it is a large challenge, and there's a lot of things that utilities are doing to try to kind of get in front of that. I would say, one of the biggest things that we're doing is just making sure that we have the funding to do so. When we're talking about, the scale of this investment that has to happen, our regulators just don't get it usually. They don't understand what it means, and the forward planning and the forward scenarios that exist for doing this just don't exist. Tom, you were at our innovation summit a couple months ago, and I think we both heard Elon Musk tell our CEO that utilities and power sector stakeholders as a group don't get it, or the amount of electricity that's coming on the grid. Whatever your projections are, throw out the window and double or triple them. And I think that urgency is exactly the case. And traditional utility thinking and traditional utility regulatory thinking needs to evolve significantly to get in front of that. In our service territory in California, we're required to use for our rate cases a projection from our Energy Commission that has historically shown itself to be woefully inadequate in relation to actual need and demand. And that was in a far less dynamic situation than it is right now. While we're doing many things to address that specific issue, the challenge is still there. Like right now, our rate case that is pending, even if we get the full amount of funding for forward grid capacity, it's nowhere near what is needed to build service and capacity just for customer requests that exist and that we expect going forward under pragmatic assumptions. So this was such a big issue that we took it to the legislature this year. We went to Sacramento and we had to get approval, legislative directive for a special rate-making mechanism to fill that gap and to address that specific kind of regulatory disconnect. And right now that's spun up a process before our utility commission that hopefully will be addressed on a somewhat expedited time frame. That will be to be determined. But yes, it's a large challenge.
Okay. So I'm hearing challenges. Evan, let's jump back into the Inflation Reduction Act. So we're a year plus out. I, as a bit of a policy wonk, was, I guess, pleased and a little concerned that I actually saw relatively mainstream media coverage of the challenge for implementing policy and legislation once enacted. Can you share a little bit from your perspective of how implementation is going and maybe how far we have to go?
Yeah, I should, before it sounds like I'm griping, I should say that I'm extremely impressed with the efforts at the Treasury Department, at IRS, at Energy, at all the different agencies that are working. But despite their extraordinary efforts, there aren't enough people at those agencies and they can't get it done on time. And so we are at a place, for example, one of the biggest decisions that needs to be made in the regulatory process is what is a foreign entity of concern? Because if one of those things, extracts critical minerals used in a battery or makes the components used in the battery, then that vehicle doesn't get a credit. So we don't know what that is. And we need to certify compliance for deliveries in January 1st, vehicles that are already made. And so we're at a place where it's very difficult to just operate in this context, and so it's even harder, therefore, to really communicate outward to the public what is possible for them. How they should personally make use of the Inflation Reduction Act. Substantively, what has come out has been, I think, strong. I think that we've seen a lot of good judgment, a lot of careful consideration of intense competing input from a lot of different stakeholders on different issues that matter. there was a decision about a year ago now about how to bin vehicles, to apply certain caps about how expensive they can be and still be eligible. And the government got it wrong. And we and a lot of other stakeholders engaged, and they heard us, and they changed it, right? So there's room for that. Most of the friction, I think, is due to difficult drafting, that nobody quite knows where certain things came from in the bill. If you recall, it was Build Back Better until it wasn't, and then it was dead, and then all of a sudden it was a passed law. And so everyone's looking around wondering, well, what happened? And so there's still a lot of what happened. And so there's still a lot of unanswered questions about exactly what certain language means. And so, we're going to figure it out. Overall, Ford is very grateful for it, but and we don't see any possibility for legislative action in the near future, next couple of years. But I do think that bit by bit, people are understanding the extraordinary benefit of it, both to their business or their family budget, for states, to their clean energy goals. But I think that hopefully at a federal level, we're also going to begin to see widespread acknowledgement that this is the right move, that we need to be investing heavily in industry that moves the needle on climate, but also keeps us at the forefront on the global stage to compete. And that's true for electrification of vehicles, but it's true across a lot of the subject area that the IRA touches.
Okay. All right, thank you, gentlemen. So we've got a foundation here. Let me ask what questions we might have thus far from the audience, and we can challenge or throw softballs at our panelists. I've got a little of both in my portfolio, but let me just see, shout out, raise your hand. I don't think we need mics, but we have them. We're going to use them for the online audience. Maybe raise a hand. It's okay. I won't force you to ask questions. I have plenty for all of us.
I got one. I got one for Evan. So in talking with people about financing on the EV side, a big issue that has come up in discussions is on residual value. And I sort of wanted to, like, what is Ford's thinking on residual value? Because it seems to be there's a lot of uncertainty right now with EVs. And then again, as you mentioned, like the rule change in terms of the eligibility for the tax credit actually had an impact on the residual value of vehicles. And so the uncertainty around that is, to me, is a big impediment to financing on the consumer side or the fleet side.
So residual value of the particular vehicles.
The vehicle itself or the battery. Yeah. Because again, 70% of the value of that is the battery.
Yeah, no doubt. The battery is by far the largest, in terms of cost, component of the vehicle. There's nothing like it in an internal combustion vehicle. And so we're still kind of early days in terms of having, we're not in fifth, sixth, seventh generation of electric vehicles where we've got a lot of data and customer experience about exactly how long batteries last. What about if you fast charge all the time? There's a lot of questions. Recently in California, there was a regulatory effort to actually define a requirement that batteries retain a certain amount of ability to charge and range after a certain life of the vehicle. And so, we're seeing promising information that people will be able to enjoy their electric vehicles for as long as they enjoy their internal combustion vehicles, and that really the batteries are not going to be, sputtering out. There's also industry standard, although not regulatorily required, warranties. And so if something goes wrong with the battery, you've got a warranty from Ford Motor Company to take care of it. And so, it raises for me questions about just bigger questions of value. The value of having a car that gets you where you're going, that's familiar. The value of having a vehicle that gets you there with extraordinary performance, like you get an electric vehicle, that's quiet, that has no pollution, that means different things to different people. It means nothing to some people. There's also value from, and this is where you guys can chime in too, where these are batteries, and they can act as batteries. So if you would like to, you can power your entire home with your truck. And the F-150 can do that for 3 days for an average U.S. home, with regular load. And so there's just a lot more value beyond mobility that people are going to begin to to experience. But for a long time, residual value, whether it's based in research or whether it's based in what their neighbor said, that's keeping a lot of people that are reluctant. We're at a time where the early adopters have bought their EVs, and mostly Tesla sold them their EVs. But the real prize is the early majority, and then eventually the late majority. And that's where the questions like residual value and just value as a whole are going to be looming large, and there's going to be a lot of education required.
Have you been considering the end of life for those batteries? What's going to happen with them? Obviously, utilities are a great customer for those batteries at the end. So is there any thinking around that?
Yeah. So the batteries are the customers at the end. So we don't get to say, but we do think, first of all, they're extremely valuable for us as a resource, because otherwise we would need to mine for those same minerals. And so we can do urban mining instead and get those batteries back. And so I do not believe that we're facing any real acute environmental challenges associated with end-of-life batteries. The car industry as a whole has very strong recycling practices. 85% by weight of vehicles are currently recycled, mostly metals. Batteries are a very different challenge, so I don't want to downplay that. I do think that maybe one of the gaps in federal fund, I don't know if it should have been the IRA or not, but I do think that there's not a real coherent federal framework policy study underway for how we're going to grow domestic recycling, because the technical ability to do it is there, but how to do it in a way that's cost effective is not there. And so there's a risk that we'll be exporting these batteries to countries that know how to use them and want them, where we need to develop localized sort of hub and spoke models where we can efficiently get the battery where it needs to go so it can be processed and put back into the value stream.
All right, so we've opened the battery door here. So Sebastian, I'm going to go back to you. So I think really a fairly broad audience, they hear electric school bus, they may have also heard V2G. Can you tell us a little bit from your perspective or that of your organization how real V2G is? So tell us what it is. If you can share a perspective on how real it is, and then maybe a perspective on how important it may be in relation to electrifying the school bus segment.
Cool. Sure. So V2G, for those of you who don't know, it's vehicle to grid integration. So basically it's using, these big batteries that we have in the vehicles and then just, connect them to a grid to give back power or receive power when it's not needed. So, I mean, when you think about electric school buses, you have huge batteries, of course, a much bigger battery than a car. So it makes a lot of sense to start thinking about V2G in these larger vehicles. Right now, we've seen a few pilots here and there, but nothing big scale. So I think that's something we're very interested in trying to pursue and really understand, what the real value of this is. I think it has a lot of benefits when it comes to, resiliency. If there's, a big impact, natural impact, which are going to be coming much sooner, then, it has a lot of potential. These are batteries, or, the school buses are school buses that have a very set routine, so you know exactly when the bus is going to be parked, when it's not going to be parked. So it has like a lot of potential. But again, it's still very nascent. It's still something that's in a few pilots around the country. But we would definitely like to see that taking off much more. It will be hopefully a new source of revenue that schools can use to pay for the higher cost of the buses, which right now it's almost 3 times as much as a regular diesel bus. So I think, again, the theme of my conversation has been we need to do everything at the same time. So this is one of those things that we need to start exploring and start making sure that it happens.
Eric, let me ask you. So my assumption is that you and PG&E may be looking a little more at V1G rather than V2G. Can you tell us a little bit about what that is and what you're working on?
Yeah, so PG&E's portfolio of grid integration programs is vast, and it's been developed over the past 10 years, starting with time of use rates to EV-specific time of use rates to unique demand charge mitigation rates for larger EV loads to direct load control programs, DR programs using both charger and telematics-based pathways to indeed this past summer launching the nation's first, when I say large scale, it's beyond pilot V2X program. Granted, the X was H for home. It was not yet to the grid. That's a phase 2 of that. There's a variety of technology and standards-based barriers to that right now, which is a separate conversation probably. And indeed, we're launching early next year the nation's first V2G export compensation rate, and also real-time and day-ahead pricing programs for EVs. So we're excited to be doing that. Those V2X programs are with Ford, GM's involved as well. But there's the full portfolio, and because the opportunity is immense, right? You have these rolling batteries. Just those in our service territory can, power the Bay Area for like 2 days. Or some insane amount. So how do we leverage that, and how do we make sure we have the programs out there that can do that? There's so much opportunity, but luckily we're pushing the edge of what's possible, and indeed putting in place programs that will be able to leverage what will be possible when those technology and standards barriers are addressed.
Okay, thank you. So Evan, we're going to go back to you for a moment, and this may be a little uncomfortable. We'll see. So you talked a bit about your organization's investment or planned investment in this space. I definitely remember when Ford made its first announcement of, let's see what that is. That's a 7-figure commitment, 8-figure commitment in EVs. It was at a time where the organization didn't seem like it was doing great, frankly. And so it felt to me, working in the industry, like the pathway forward for Ford was an electric pathway, maybe before other major automakers, absent maybe Tesla. What some of us have seen in the news over the last week or so is that Ford may be slowing down its investment in this space. Can you share a little bit of perspective about that and how a broader audience should view what may feel like mixed signals from the automotive industry?
Yeah, it's a great question. Not that uncomfortable, because we are investing $50 billion. We're not changing that number. What we are doing now is responding to, as we always do in real time, the market. And EV demand has slowed, but it's still rising. It's still rising steadily. It's going to continue to rise steadily. And so a lot of the news coverage lately has confused speed with acceleration. And they're different things, folks. The fact is, we saw the Silverado from GM was delayed an entire year. And a lot of companies, including Ford, have eased off of the projected volume of output of certain plants. We paused our battery production facility in Michigan to make sure that we understood the business case to decide how big or small that facility should be. And that's frankly tied to both Inflation Reduction Act decisions we haven't heard yet. We just, I think today maybe the union members voted to ratify our deal, which was a 6-week strike. That was a very big deal for us. Not a big deal for most automakers who don't have unionized workers. So that's a pretty big difference. But we are still all in on America and all in on EVs. And so what we need to do is eventually begin to make money on electric vehicles. We're not doing that yet. And so we have got to satisfy our shareholders and Wall Street while also meeting environmental requirements and also upholding all of our goals as a brand. So we are easing off of some of the targets that we set for production, but we're still putting just as much money toward the EV future. And so I think overall, this is going to be just a little hiccup in the trajectory.
Tom, I think it is important to emphasize that the doom and gloom characterization and news stories we've seen, it's a selective reading of the data out there. Yeah. It's painting a picture that is not aligned with the data. And sure, there's things that I haven't spoke to, but at the same time, consumer demand is there. It just might not be for the vehicles that are available right now. And this is something that the industry realizes. Most manufacturers start with their most expensive vehicles and work their way down. But I heard someone recently, was at EPRI, kind of draw the analogy of, hey, it's like only serving $20 sundaes on a hot day with 5 scoops of ice cream, and then complaining that there's no demand for ice cream. The demand's there. The data is the selective reading, and I'm confident that we'll move beyond this. But yes, the reporting of the selective data is, I think, a bit concerning, and people should have that asterisk right there in their front of their mind.
And Evan, I think I shortchanged it. I'm a policy guy, a little less on the numbers front.
Yep.
I think that initial investment that I was referring to from Ford, that's 11 figures.
Yeah, I didn't jump in there, but
yeah. So sorry about that.
Yeah, U.S. dollars.
Eric, back to you. So we heard earlier. So we just heard, hey, things are not maybe how they're being reported. We heard you say 1 in 6 EVs are in PG&E service area. Can you tell us a little bit? I've seen some numbers about sales in California and percentage of electrics. Can you just share that and how you feel like that's trending, at least in California?
Yeah, I mean, you probably saw the headline. The governor's office announced today that the last quarter, it was nearly a third. It was like 27.5% of sales in California in the last quarter were electric. And sure, that's at the vanguard of that transition, but that's where the industry is going. So there is demand. There's challenges compounding demand along the lines of what we just spoke to. Also, connector-related challenges that we haven't spoken to. Other sorts of challenges, but I am confident we'll get ahead of that. And the opportunity for grid management and load management is tremendous. Yeah.
So Sebastian, we heard a little bit about micromobility from you, or let's think beyond the car. So I live in LA near the beach. I definitely remember when it felt like electric scooters were taking over that part of LA. More recently, it feels like maybe 2 out of every 3 bikes I see is electric, and someone may not be pedaling it. Can you tell us a little bit about how things are going in, let's call it micromobility land, in terms of electrification, and what some of those opportunities may be?
Yes, so I think you're talking about like all these companies that came and just dropped their vehicles one day, and they were there, and there was a huge pile of vehicles there. I think that is just a very small part of the story. As I mentioned this before, but I think private electric micromobility vehicles are the real story, and it's just flying under the radar completely. By far, number 1 EV sold in the world today, electric bikes. So that's really the key thing that we need to be following. If you think about the US, which again, like completely dominated by cars, 60% of the trips that are done in the US right now are less than 5 miles. That's something that could be easily done on an electric bike with no problem. We just need like the support, right? We need the infrastructure. Like you can't expect people to just, ride their bike on a 50-mile highway. So we just need, the additional support from the infrastructure in particular to get us there. But it's completely possible. It's really, it's obviously a battery from an e-bike is really small. The impact that has on the environment is minuscule when compared to a regular bus or a car. And the energy demands that, those batteries have also are very small. So I think, again, it's something that flies under the radar, but it's something that I think people should be paying much more attention to right now. And again, not letting just, our mind go to, these big companies that dumped all these vehicles, but rather, the single person that's, buying their e-bike and they're starting to use it a bit more and seeing how that is, a real alternative to other transportation.
Well, thank you. I'll just share with the audience, one of my Vermont law classmates is working in the micromobility space and really in new market entry geographically for that space. And so I've gotten to learn a little bit from him. But I will share just personally, I drive more than I don't drive when I'm transporting myself in LA, but there have been some opportunities that I've had to have an electric scooter. And I have to say, they're awfully fun. I will also say that we've got a lot of policy and land use related planning to make people feel safer outside of a vehicle. So I do want to acknowledge that. So you heard a little doom and gloom to build our foundation. I think you've now heard some more positive messaging and perspective. Do we have audience questions at this moment? All right, if you can wait for the mic a moment.
So scalability seems to be, and like the ability to reach economies of scale, seems to be what has really propelled Tesla to be the standard for all EVs. What other hurdles are you seeing in the EV space, and what is Ford doing to mitigate those challenges?
Yeah, scale and volume are huge in most sectors, and that's definitely true for automotive. Tesla has a couple other advantages. They came out early and they satisfied a market demand that other companies, including Ford, didn't capitalize on. They also get to sell very lucrative credits to other companies in different regulatory programs, and so there's just a lot of smart aspects of their business. They have a simple lineup. So we're definitely watching. There's actually a lot of admiration between the companies, both in the DC policy offices, but at the CEO level. And so we are fierce competitors, but we also think there's a lot of room for both ships to rise. And I think that we need to simplify our product lineup. I think that we need to focus on quality, just because we end up losing a lot of money through warranty, frankly. And that's true across our products, but that needs to happen for electric vehicles. And so a lot of the money that people play with the numbers, but we're losing money on EVs in part because we just haven't yet made many years of use of the investments and the capital needed to make them in the first place. And so we're going to get there, and we've got a plan to be profitable that we've given to Wall Street by I want to say 2026 in our electric vehicle business. But we about a year ago broke off into separate legal entities the gas diesel business from our Ford Pro, which is about vehicle sales but also services for commercial fleets, from Model E, which is our division focused on electric vehicles. So we're making sure that each of the businesses can operate on their own and be viable. So hopefully I'm answering your question, but yeah.
I'm Alan Strasser. I have a question, and it comes from my most recent experience with electrification on airports, where I work at FAA. People are complaining that there's not sufficient capacity from utilities to really satisfy the desire. Hertz Rent-A-Car, of course, as you heard, is trying to locate their EV rental facilities all over the country, and there's 3,300 airports, by the way. And they're kind of frustrated because they're not getting enough capacity. But another thing that's happening is people are wondering, okay, so the capacity is there in certain instances and certain facilities that can drive EV sales or charging, but is it really clean energy that's going there? And that's a question that airports are asking. I just wonder what your experience is and what is the bigger problem here for capitalizing on EVs? Is it capacity or is it clean energy? Probably answer changes amongst the panelists, I'd imagine.
Eric, do you want to?
Yeah, and on the latter, it varies based on geography as well. Different utilities varies greatly how clean their grid is, but I think all of them, they're trending in a positive direction. And even the dirtiest utilities that are predominantly coal, like the life cycle of those emissions is still significantly better when you're going electric through a battery, just due to the efficiency of the system and other factors. To the capacity challenge, I spoke earlier to some of the challenges, doom and gloom otherwise, but I am optimistic that those challenges can be overcome. I'm just level setting on you have a 100-year-old system and an equally as old regulatory construct that's being asked to change very quickly. But we have smart people working on this. Organizations like EPRI and their EVs at Scale initiative, our CEOs on the chair of that, kind of working through what it looks like to do better forward modeling. How do we evolve the regulatory paradigm to be able to do proactive investments to pull forward these challenges such that when someone comes to us and needs 2 megawatts tomorrow, right, the answer isn't, well, we got to upgrade the substation and come back in 4 years, right? Which is sometimes the answer right now. But we're eyes wide open on what it takes to address those. We are doing those things right now. I mean, I like to give the example of a supercharging site in our service territory is a Tesla supercharger site. They needed 2 megawatts, and by our initial just kind of load analysis, that was going to trigger a feeder bank that needed to be upgraded, and that was going to take close to 4 years to do. Not a good answer for anyone, right? So we looked at it again, did an hourly load analysis, and figured out that, well, we can only not supply that 2 megawatts 2 hours of the year, right? And it could very well be that those 2 hours aren't hours that Tesla actually needs the full 2 megawatts, right? So you can quickly see there's a lot of opportunity to kind of better match available power and demand. And indeed, in that scenario, we were able to work with Tesla to basically kind of Tetris in capacity over time, layer that in as it becomes available, as we're doing the broader upgrade, right? To get them, this is what you can get now, this is what we can provide tomorrow, and then utilizing technology and other solutions, kind of bridge that gap in a more intelligent way, moving beyond just the kind of the traditional utility, worst case scenario planning, which is generally the way it's done for safety and other reasons. So leaning forward, looking at more innovative solutions, I think there's a lot of opportunity there.
It's similar that the electric vehicles, Ford's, a lot of other companies have incredible abilities for managed charging, right? So if we've got 50 Mach-E's at a Hertz rental facility at an airport, and we know it's an issue, it's technically possible that we would geofence them, we would understand, and then the vehicles themselves would only take from the grid what it is that's their fair share. And so that's to say that there's a way for the vehicles to also be good citizens of the grid, even after the infrastructure decisions are made.
I think some of you probably weren't even alive when I started in the industry. I go back to PURPA. So I've seen an evolution. We thought we'd never get through PURPA. We thought we'd never overcome all those problems. We did. And in defense of the regulators, I have a 35-year career as a regulator. And I worked my way up through as a staff counsel, then an ALJ, and then the governor appointed me secretary to the New York State Commission. And I mean, there are a lot of, I'm sure you didn't mean to malign all regulators, and that they don't get it, because, some of us do. Some of us know that there are a lot of issues that go into this and a lot of interests that go into this. And in many states, the regulators are political appointees. So I don't think I need to say more on that issue. So there are a lot of issues that go into this, but I think we'll get through it eventually. It's not an overnight fix. And but I think the big issue is the combination of, the grid making, finding enough capacity in the grid for the charging and finding the charging stations. At least that's what I found in New York. And in California, well, California is California. You take everything else and you multiply it by 10 when you get to California. And I don't know that you can judge the rest of the country by the problems you find in California, because they're just, exacerbated when you get there. But it's clear that we have to move to electric vehicles for the sake of the country, for the sake of our environment, and I really applaud what you're doing for the rest of the country.
Appreciate those comments, and I would just add, it's not about individuals. It's just being eyes wide open about the tools that utilities have and the tools that regulators have. The traditional utility regulation construct, bond by principles, everything. I think those things need to evolve. the toolboxes that folks have to address the problems aren't well situated to the challenges going forward. They were fine for a utility system when demand was flat, things changed relatively not that quickly. That's no longer the case. So naturally, some evolution needs to happen on all those fronts to kind of rise to the challenge. And I think there's smart folks, good folks doing that across the board.
I'm Sarah, JDOA. Jackie said something that sparked a question to me. You said, when you can find the chargers when you're charging your car. I have a plug-in hybrid. It's not a Ford. Sorry, Evan. And I live here in DC. I don't have a driveway, so I can't charge it at home. And my biggest challenge is finding a charger to charge it in. And there's been a lot of talk about and investments from the industry to build a charging network on highways, but most of driving for most people is not on the highways day to day around town. And so I'm curious if there are either trends that are already happening or incentives that need to be put in place for more just like chargers in the communities. Like a highway is great, Target, like I'm going to spend 2 hours there anyway, but it feels like that there's a missed opportunity there to build out that infrastructure, which would also lower the barrier to people buying it because they will see more chargers in their communities. So. It's also
Well, yeah. You want to talk charging? Should I?
Well, let me reframe for just a moment, and I may take moderator prerogative to share a little perspective. But so let me reframe just a touch. So part of the potential opportunity, paradigm shift, behavior change for folks around electrification is that these vehicles can refuel when they're parked. At someone's house, if they have the ability to have a charger there, at work, if people aren't working remotely, at school, etc., and indeed at Target. Do you feel like consumers are getting this and excited about not needing to go to the gas station, being able to just plug in their garage if they have one? Do you feel like the industry is taking advantage of this ability or is maybe trying to replicate, for better or worse, the traditional gas station model?
Yeah, I think that people are excited about being able to charge in downtime. But I think mostly those people are the ones with EVs already. A lot of people who don't have EVs are in a place where they're thinking about the worst case situation. They're thinking about the road trip they take once 5 times a year. And what am I going to do then? And, there's a saying about you build the church for Easter morning, right? For Easter Sunday. It's like, well, you don't need to build the church for Easter Sunday, to get the smaller batteries. I think that one of the evolutions I think is going to happen is people are going to realize they don't need nearly as much battery as they think that they need right now. They're going to get it and they're going to realize I don't ever get down below 40% on this battery. I just carry it around all the time and I paid an extra $5,000 for it up front. Because we're going to see more charging. So $5 billion are being moved now. I think the first NEVI chargers are in the ground now. In Ohio, I heard. I don't know for sure, but it's happening. The IRA also includes incentives to take the cost of 6 to 30% off for investing in charging infrastructure for people at their home or for any business that wants to do it. And so that's going to take the edge off as well. But I think that there's a lot of misconception out there, and a lot of people who are EV enthusiasts move well past a lot of uncertain areas for smart but so far unaffiliated consumers. It's useful, I think, to explain it in really simple terms, like, well, you use a phone every day, and you can charge it enough so you don't run out of battery on your phone. If you'd like to be diligent about it, no problem. That plug behind your dryer, that's the kind of plug you need to put in your garage or somewhere to have a level 2 charger at your house. There's not, it takes some of the mystery out of it, and I think that people are going to pretty quickly come their way. Also, you can get by on a level 1 charger. It's actually not that hard to do that in a lot of contexts, just because people really just don't drive that much. Okay, so I'm a level 1 guy. I just
plug my car into the wall in my garage. But so I think, this is part of the movement that we've seen via these legislative packages over the last couple of years, is the recognition that we need a lot of infrastructure. Consumers need a lot more confidence that there is infrastructure, even if they don't actually need it. But I think we're really scratching the surface in terms of, let's call it traditional retail America, on whether they're starting to provide charging as an amenity to their existing customers, whether they're potentially taking the opportunity to offer charging as a way to gain new customers who might not otherwise go there. I might offer the example, and it's maybe a special one, but we've seen, I think, a lot of this, especially where I live in LA. Yes, 25+% of new vehicle purchases in California, and definitely in LA, are electric. And so you go to the grocery store, there's probably a charger, or there's a charger in the works, because there's a recognition that so many consumers have EVs and want to be able to plug in. They might not need to plug in, but they want to. Walmart has gone so far as to go beyond hosting chargers. They've decided to stand up their own charging business. And so I think that's a great example of retail America really hearing from consumers and seeing an opportunity to both attract consumers potentially in a different way, but indeed even change its revenue stream by leveraging that need or the opportunity. But that being said, even me in LA, in California, there's plenty of charging for me, for my use case, but I absolutely see that for the folks who may have those trips to different places, there's not enough confidence in the infrastructure out there. Let me pause there. Kevin, do we have any online questions that we should be paying attention to?
We do have one online question that I'll do, and I think we have some more in the room, and we're probably running out of time too, but we want to definitely involve our live streamers. So this is back to bidirectional charging, and I'll just summarize it. Who's going to be making the decisions on when vehicles are charged and discharged, and what level of compensation vehicle drivers receive for their contribution to the grid? And are regulators on the whole behind the curve or on top of enabling bidirectional charging?
Sebastian, do you want to maybe start and Eric clean up on that one?
Sure. It's a challenging question, and I think you'll know the regulation much better than me. When it comes to school buses in particular, which is again the area that we're working on right now, it has to be in conjunction with the utility, and I think that's one of the big challenges because that discussion is still not happening. School districts are not used to talking to their utilities. It's something that's completely new to them. So I think it's something that's going to need to be developed through time. But I think I'm not really the one to talk about the regulation.
Yeah, we're charting new water on this right now. This is a very new topic. How do we share the value? How do we know what the value is so we know how to divvy it up and how to share it? In California, there was a decision out of the commission a while ago that kind of, amongst the three big IOUs, split up kind of innovation and forward thinking with respect to different types of VGI. PG&E got the most difficult one, which is the V2X piece. That's why we're launching these V2X compensation rates in hopefully January, February. But those are really like the first of their kind. I can't speak to the exact details of what the numbers are. I think they're public at this point, but it's really just a starting place. It's let's put something on the table, see if it works. Hopefully the technology issues catch up so that more folks can actually utilize them going forward. But yeah, this is bleeding edge stuff, and we're doing our best. The industry is doing its best to lean in.
Evan, maybe take a moment. Ford's been engaged. You shared earlier about I guess, V2H, if we will, rather than maybe V2X. But I've seen some announcements maybe a while ago now around some of the work that Ford's been doing around, managed charging or discharging. Can you just share a quick perspective on that?
Yeah, so again, these are batteries. These vehicles are batteries, and they can do things that batteries can do. And so, thinking about the value beyond mobility, and one of the main, selling points, I think, in that space is that you can use it as a source of backup power for your home. And our vehicles can do that now. That's possible as we speak. We are engaged with regulators. We are trying to, to forge ahead on the next phase of that, which would be to export power to the grid. There's a lot of, slowness there. That's okay, but it's to say that we're having, we keep running into questions about interconnection just to have a vehicle as a backup power, like you would for any number of homes in America that choose to buy a propane, generator and put it in their backyard when the grid is down. And so we need to get through that. I think we're going to get through that. We're the first out with F-150 bidirectional vehicle. We're cutting new ground, but it's going to be a while before we figure this out. It's going to be in places like PG&E service territory, frankly, where you're going to see some of the first programs that really work and then scale up. And so we're definitely exercising new muscles, working with utilities and the regulators like we haven't before.
All right, so let me wrap up maybe with a little bit of a lightning round here. So I think we heard, okay, maybe not doom and gloom, but big challenges ahead. Some things are going really well and may not be making their way into sort of mainstream media recognition. Maybe like 30 seconds or so for each of you. What's something that you might have as an ask to the community here in the room or online, or indeed to Vermont law about what they can do to help? Sebastian, maybe start with you.
Sure. I think individual actions, of course, are important. So, by all means, if you're going to buy a new car, please buy electric. But just really consider how, your environment, the environment that you're in, is conditioning the way you're moving in your environment. And I think just having that realization that the infrastructure that we've built for the past 100 years is conditioning how we're carrying out our daily lives. I think that's going to really take us a long way in understanding that, might not need cars for absolutely everything.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. And just add, we need more smart people working on these issues. Like the work is pressing as anything. Sometimes it's dry, but we need folks in the room. VLS is as well positioned as any program in the country to develop these new leaders, this new thinking, and to look at what's been done and how to do it better. Perhaps California is an outlier. Perhaps it's a harbinger of things to come elsewhere. Probably it's a balance between those two. Let's learn from folk experience. Let's do things better going forward. Let's reinvent the toolbox as need be. We've done it before. We can do it again. 20 years ago, we couldn't figure out how to build transmissions lines to renewables in far-flung places, right? We threw out the rule book, figured out a way to build the infrastructure. The demand load came, but we had to move beyond our traditional way of doing those things, and I think we can do it here going forward as well. So. Yeah.
Evan, what's your ask of this room or community?
Yeah, I think we need to depoliticize electric vehicles. It's in the way. It's really in the way, and it's easy to do. I think in any particular conversations you're in or any efforts that you're in, there's a lot of objective reasons for the sake of our economy, for the sake of individual choice. There's all kinds of things that objectively should be working for both political parties, and we need both political parties to be supporting clean energy revolution. It's good for the country. So wherever you can find a way to do that, please do it.
All right. Well, gentlemen, thank you very much. If we can take a moment and thank the panel.
To close the session today, I invite President Rodney Smola. We haven't met yet, but I'm pleased to meet you. I was able to look over your bio today, and there's a couple things that really stand out. First, it's great to see that you've been in your position here for a year and a half at VLGS, so a welcome. You've had an illustrative career in education as president and dean of various universities and law schools. A couple things that stood out for me is that you really have a history of being an advocate for experiential learning and the development of professional competencies through civic engagement. And when we look at the main street of Vermont and South Royalton, I think you can really grow these capabilities in the Vermont Law School students. I think it's also really interesting that you have been and remain an active litigator representing matters for defamation and invasion of privacy. I hope today, as your first experience at the Energy Symposium, that you've seen a little bit about the community of the VLGS alumni and how much the experience that people have at Vermont Law School resonate throughout their own careers. So with that, I welcome you up to have some closing remarks.
Thanks, Dan. Thanks for your leadership and moderation all day. And thanks, Kevin Jones, for your leadership and putting everything together for this. Thanks to Bracewell for your hospitality in this beautiful building and facility. And I want to thank all the faculty members, staff members, students who are here, our alumni who make us so proud, and all of the experts and friends from around the country who have contributed so much to the discourse today. It was stunning for me. This is the second time I've been to this event. It was stunning for me to listen all day. I got here at 1 and I listened to all of the various panels. Now, I have to be honest, I didn't always understand everything. So there was a little bit of a gap, kind of a ratio gap between what I was listening to and what I comprehended. It reminded me a bit sometimes of what happens at our home. My wife, Anya, is here joining me. She's Russian. And of course, being a nice family and a good husband, she gets to watch Russian language movies from time to time. I watch sports. She can watch Russian language movies. And sometimes there's no subtitles, no translation. And I still can kind of get what's going on, but there's a bit is lost in translation or lost in the lack of it. And that happened to me a few times today. I'm not a scientist. I'm not an engineer. I'm not an energy lawyer. I'm not a energy policy person. I'm not good mentally at translating acronyms. Acronyms give me I have to, and I tried, this is sort of an aside, some of you heard me say this, I tried when I came to the Vermont Law and Graduate School to use my executive powers to ban acronyms. I tried it. We have way more acronyms than we have electric vehicle chargers. And you can Google this actually, per capita, we have more acronyms per student than any university in the United States. Right? So there was this alphabet soup of clinics and programs and institutes and everything, and I didn't really know what people were talking about. So I tried to ban it, and of course it was a foolish idea. I took some solace. I do a lot of litigation, and still I've argued a lot here in the District of Columbia Court of Appeals, U.S. Court of Appeals for the District of Columbia, and they have banned acronyms. If you write a brief in the Court of Appeals here and you put an acronym in your brief, the clerk will send it back and say, take it out, resubmit the brief, write it out. So I thought, okay, the Court of Appeals could do it, I could do it. But no, it turns out it's been of no use. But I was able to decipher. I was kind of teasing. I was able to follow most of what was said today. And I came away with this big picture question. And every panel talked about this a bit. Should I, as a citizen, a non-expert, be pessimistic or optimistic? And I came away, first of all, saying, well, maybe that's not the right dichotomy. Maybe the point is to be realistic. And there was a lot of realism today, which I enjoyed. I felt like this kind of constant theme. On the one hand, people feel wonderful about some of what has happened in the last couple of years, both in the public sector and the private sector. They feel wonderful about the parade of legislation over the last 2 years that has been transformative. So that's good. They feel good about the government for that. But there's also this enormous frustration that you heard at all various points of the day. People frustrated with the lack of clarity, the lack of consistency, the rules of the game changing, the uncertainty. People optimistic about the underlying promise of new forms of generation of power, but also frustrated and scared about the transmission of power. People seeing the beauty and the wonder of electric vehicles, but also the challenges of bringing it to scale. My wife and I are right now in the process of listening on tape to the Walter Isaacson book on Elon Musk. So he wrote the book on Da Vinci, and he wrote the book on Steve Jobs, and he wrote a book about Einstein. And I really recommend the Elon Musk book. Really a fascinating sort of love-hate sort of portraiture of that, of a very intriguing person. But in the end, I came away incorrigibly optimistic. And not just optimistic, but very, very proud. And very, very proud of Vermont Law and Graduate School. And I'll share a few thoughts about that. One of the final panelists said, you know, what can the school do? And I hearkened back to John Kennedy, ask not what Vermont Law and Graduate School can do for you. Ask what you can do for Vermont Law and Graduate School. And I thought, I was just listening, and I thought, you know, the numbers that were on the screens were staggering. The billions of dollars, the billions of government money, the billions of private capital. Some of you may remember the wonderful astronomer Carl Sagan, who had this great television program and about the universe, and he would talk about billions and billions of stars, you know, and I was thinking of the billions and billions of dollars. And is there some way the Vermont Law and Graduate School could get a little taste? All right, is there some place in all these billions for us? And I mean it seriously, because we learned about the kinks in the system, we learned about the chinks in the system, we learned about supply chain challenges, and we learned about transmission challenges and so on, and where the shortages are. And it occurred to me, and actually this was mentioned in the very last panel, it occurred to me that there's another kind of shortage to be worried about as a country, as a world. So not a supply chain shortage, not a shortage of hydrogen power, not a shortage of wind power, not a shortage of solar power, not a shortage of electrical vehicles. How about this shortage as an important thing to take into account? The brain power shortage. I mean, we got billions of dollars. We got so many challenges. You got to have brain power to make it happen. Now, there's no shortage of brain power in this room, but writ large, we need people who care about these policy issues. We need lawyers who care about sorting through these transactions. And we need lobbyists who are able to influence policymakers. We need entrepreneurs. We need brain power. And as has already been said, you mentioned it, there is no place, in my view, in the country more dedicated to that brain power. We need more students. We need you all to employ our students. We have our career services person with us today. We need more graduates to be on these programs 10 years from now that are coming in now. And candidly, we need resources. My only job really is to be out on the road raising money. That's my only job. So those of you that are graduates, send us a little something, all right? Or more if you can. But even more significantly than that, if you can put us in touch with the right folks to talk to, the companies, the foundations, the people with capacity, so that we can convince folks this is a key piece of the supply chain. Producing future leaders, producing people with the intellectual capacity and the altruism and the passion for making a difference in the world in these issues is enormously important. And that little school in South Royalton has had a dramatic impact on this country and this world already. And we want to make sure it's always there. And we want to make sure it prospers. And we want to make sure it's possible for a future generation of students to come and do great things like you all are doing. So I came away optimistic, proud. I learned a lot. You can give me an acronym quiz after this over a glass of wine. We'll see how quickly I can remember things. Thank you all for all that you've done in your careers. Thank you all for all that you did today. And congratulations to everybody.
Thank you, thank you, President Smollett. I think you really hit on it. It's an amazing what a smart group of people in a small town in the middle of Vermont can do when you have passion. And I think all of us can agree that the time that any of us who've spent in South Royalton, we formed a bond with friends, we formed a bond with our studies and our careers. And it's amazing to see all of you and to learn from you still after all these years coming to these events and talking about what you've done, what you've accomplished, and educating those around you. So with those words, I'd like to give a final thank you to our sponsors, Bracewell, Perkins Coie, the Energy Institute, the Alumni Office, fellow members of the Energy and Alumni Group. And I conclude this symposium by inviting you all to next year's symposium to be the 11th annual symposium for the Alumni and Energy. So thank you and see you all next year.